person in charge of the Indeed Hiring Lab is my good friend and colleague, Svenja Gudell, who's going to join us today to talk about a couple interesting things they have going on there and some information and data I know you will find very, very useful. So with that, I'd like to welcome my friend Svenja.
Who just yelled when they heard Hiring Lab? Extra cookies, extra cookies. Oh, Jess, it's you. I am honored to be here today in front of this very full room. How very exciting. A little anxiety driving as well, but very exciting. I, of course, come to you speaking between two ferns, but I'll keep it not awkward at all. All joking aside, I'm here to talk to you about 5 trends shaping today's labor market. And this is stuff my colleagues and I talk about all the time at the Hiring Lab. We cover 8 different countries with our research, have an amazing team that I'm incredibly proud of, and I have a huge shout out to them for all the work that has gone into the slides and all the research behind the slides that I'm about to talk about. In fact, let me give you an overview of what we will tackle today. We'll talk about labor demand and supply. We'll talk about wages and inflation, what all that means for a potential future recession. And then as a special treat, I'm especially excited to talk to you about our latest AI research, which is actually out this morning. So if you go to hiringlab.org, you can check that out. And not right now, of course, because, up here. But it'll be super exciting, hopefully, to share that with you. So before we jump in, buckle up. We're going to spend about 15 minutes talking about all this. Get excited to see some charts at high speed over here. So let's jump right into it. Labor demand. It will come to no surprise to any of you that it's been a relatively tight labor market, and it still is a relatively tight labor market. And I really like this chart to denote this one. This shows you number of open positions per unemployed worker. And you'll see, if you could squint and guess exactly what the last number is, it'd be 1.5. There are 1.5 positions for every open positions for every unemployed worker right now. And that is higher than what it was pre-pandemic. And listen, pre-pandemic was no labor market to sneeze at either. It was pretty tight as well. So even though we're not hitting the highs of 2, which we saw in 2022, it's still pretty tight out there. And it gives us an understanding of what's really going on right now. So turning to demand, one of the series we really like to look at in order to gauge what is labor demand right now is our own job postings index that we have at Indeed. And that's the series right here. The blue one, you'll see, is overall postings. So we literally just look at all the job postings we have at Indeed, millions and millions of them, and we are able to track them over time and get a really nice feel for, okay, what kind of labor are people actually, what labor are employers demanding out there? The pink line is new postings, and you'll see it's indexed to pre-pandemic levels. It gives you a nice baseline. Right at February of 2020, we saw the initial dip down during the pandemic, and then our emergence from there. We hit highs in early 2022, where we saw a ton of demand for labor, of course. And since then, we've been on this gradual decline and gradual cooling of the labor market. Now, it's important to kind of lift up the hood a little bit and get a good sense for what's happening across different occupational sectors, because especially now, as we are starting to cool, the story differs depending on which type of job you're looking at. So here, I chose these 4 categories for you to look at. And if you're looking at, for example, software development, that green line that really peaked during 2022, the early days, we saw a lot of software developers being hired during the pandemic, and that has really come down quite a bit at this point. In fact, it's come down so far that we're at pre-pandemic levels at this point. The same story holds in similar fashion for marketing and even HR, where we're not seeing quite as much demand for labor there. However, if you look at occupational sectors such as nursing or food prep, you'll see that we came out of the pandemic, we saw a pickup in demand after the initial shock, and we've stayed pretty constant. So their demand still remains really strong for those types of occupations. So again, mixed stories in terms of what type of jobs you're looking at. Let's turn over to labor supply for a quick second. Good news on that front, and man, this one took us a while to get back to. Getting more labor supply into the market, right? We needed more people to actually take jobs, and you can see we're finally back. So that's great news. And of course, for various reasons, it took us quite a long time to get there. People exited the market because of COVID concerns. They were laid off. They lost their jobs. and or they had to stay home and take care of the kids. And it really took a while for example, to get women back into the workforce. So all that meant that this reacceleration in labor supply took us a while, but it's looking quite good, particularly compared to historical standards. So this is, of course, feeding into this cooling labor market that we saw on the demand side as well, right? More supply means it's easier to find, hopefully, people to take jobs, and all that means the labor market itself is starting to relax a little bit more. Now, I think we can officially call this one, the Great Resignation is over. Right here, right? Get off your phones looking for jobs, you're stuck. No, I'm kidding. We see right here the quits rate, and you can see that during the Great Resignation, people really churned in the market quite a bit. They looked to the other side, grass on the other side of the fence looked much greener, and they said, hey, I'll get more money if I switch over here. I'm looking for something different. I want more benefits. I want a different working environment. Perhaps I want remote working abilities. Whatever your desire as a worker was, you tried to find it, and there was a lot of churn, and that showed up in the quits rate right here. And you can see we're back to pre-pandemic levels, although it's worth noting, if you were to see a chart that had a much longer x-axis here, you'd see that pre-pandemic, that was actually a pretty elevated quits rate already. So again, all evidence that, it's still pretty hot in the labor market, not as hot as it used to be, but it's still a pretty hot market. Now, what does all that mean for wage growth and inflation? Here, I'm a big fan of this one. The pink line you'll see is our Indeed wage tracker, our way of measuring wage growth. And I could be biased, I'm not so sure, but I think this is like the best way to measure wage growth, but could be biased. And it's a pretty new product for us. You can get it on hireandlab.org/data. You can download it. And the great thing here is you can see that wage growth has really slowed. As the labor market started to cool, we are seeing wages or wage growth rather, coming down. So they're still growing, albeit at a slower rate. And the particularly good news right now, if you look at the blue line, which is measuring inflation, CPI here, now wages are growing faster than inflation. That's always great news for workers, right? At the end of the day, they get to take home a little bit more, and it doesn't feel quite as expensive anymore. However, again, that's the thing with economists. We always have the however that follows everything, so we can be like, on the one hand, on the other hand. However, it's not the full story, because if you actually look a little bit closer, compensation is more than just cash in a form of a salary, right? It comes in different benefits and different packages. And here, I'm showing you signing bonuses that employers are still using, of course, as a really important tool to actually get talent in-house. One of our pieces of research found that nursing was an occupation where signing bonuses are used very frequently. And you can see right here that they're still in use quite a bit. Even though wage growth has kind of come down, the use of signing bonuses is still well and alive right here, and we're not seeing as much of a downturn in that particular behavior. So what does all this mean taken together for tomorrow, and for, in particular, recession risk? Well, let's take a step back for just a moment and see overall in the economy what's going on. And one of the things I really like to look at to kind of get a pulse is to, of course, look at the labor market, but also consumption. Right here, you'll see consumer spending still holds strong. And the two graphs that you're seeing, this is personal consumption expenditures, fancy word for how much money are we spending on stuff. Goods is pink line, blue line is services. And of course, coming out of the initial shock of the pandemic, we all ordered our bread makers. I got myself a treadmill at home, which I don't use enough. Reminder to myself to use it more. And everything else that we ordered along the way. And of course, services started picking up post-vaccines. We felt more comfortable. Whatever it was, we started going to restaurants more often, Broadway plays. And interestingly enough, we didn't switch off goods for services as much as many economists thought we would. So we continued to consume a lot of goods. I still get a lot of Amazon packages at my home. You can ask my husband about that one. And we still consume, now again, a lot of services along the way as well. So all to say, this, of course, fuels the labor market quite a bit. We need people to produce goods, and we need people to actually perform services. So as long as this picture holds true, our economy is still holding strong quite a bit, and that reduces recession risk along the way. Another measure that's really good to look at is, of course, unemployment and layoffs, right, to get a sense of what's going on. Usually in a recession, we have unemployment pick up quite a bit, and you have more layoffs. Here you see layoffs, and as you can kind of see, the dashed line is our, prior to the pandemic, our lowest point, and we're below that. So even though we've all read the headlines around tech layoffs, finance jobs being laid off, if you look at the entire basket of jobs in the US, there are not as many layoffs as you might have thought there were coming from these headlines. And that's really important to know. Our unemployment rate, currently at 3.8%, has ticked up slightly, but hold on a second, let's realize 3.8% for unemployment is incredibly low. It's like blow your mind low. And even though we've come back up again from lower points, a lot of that has been driven by the fact that we've increased supply in the labor market. Just more people entering into the labor force and saying, hi, I'm here, I'd like a job, dries up the unemployment rate as they're searching for a new job, right? But it hasn't come from this source, which is layoffs. And that's also really good news and reduces the risk of a recession in the near future. But we're all in a business cycle here, so at some point the recession will come. And, I advise against asking too many economists when that is, because we're notoriously bad at forecasting the future. But, for right now, we don't think it's happening anytime soon. So speaking of the future, let's focus for a moment on AI. AI is clearly a very important topic of this conference, something that you all are probably thinking about heavily, and is clearly going to impact the labor force and the job market of tomorrow. So we just published today our Indeed's AI at Work report, which is looking specifically at how Gen AI is going to impact skills and the jobs that skills make up. And so, we really at the hiring lab, we had a hack week, and we're like, okay, how do we get our hands around what AI is kind of doing to the job market? And if you've kind of read the latest articles about this, we saw that there's a lot of hype for one. And of course, there's a lot of surveys out there that ask people, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think will happen in 2 years, in 5 years? How many jobs will be impacted? And while I love a good survey and it's great for sentiment, here I wanted some hard data. I wanted to actually know what was going to happen, if possible. So we first looked, all right, let's check out how many jobs right now that we see at Indeed out of all the millions of jobs. And we actually have, this is our generative AI tracker that we just released. This is for the US, but we have this for other countries as well. And you'll see this is the number of AI jobs that actually mention generative AI somewhere in their job description. So most of these will be, hey, can you be a machine learning engineer that develops large language models for us kind of thing? Or it could be, we want to hire you as a content creator for this marketing role that uses Gen AI tools. But really important, man, is that a steep increase since last year? That's crazy, right? But take a look at the y-axis. We're not even hitting 1% on that thing. It is so smushed, I had to really pull that thing apart. So it really, there's quite a room to grow here. We are at the very early stages of building and using these tools. However, we did want to know how many people actually are starting to use this, how many are exploring using tools. In our survey, we found that 87% of HR professionals and talent acquisition leaders that we asked are currently using AI in some shape or form. So that's a lot of people that are starting to play around with these tools. So they're really important, and that kind of speaks to what kind of impact we might be seeing here in the future. So we said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We took a look at Indeed, we have a fabulous skills taxonomy, which is a fancy term for saying we keep track of all the different skills that are needed to perform a job. And we took all those skills and we tried to figure out how exposed will these skills be to Gen AI, meaning, in other words, how good is Gen AI doing these or performing these particular skills? Turns out Gen AI is not so good at driving, right? Gen AI is, well, I'll tell you about cooking in a little bit. Gen AI also not great at childcare, much to my chagrin, but it's really good at communication. it says. It's very good at coding certain things, right? If you've ever used Copilot, perhaps, in a coding setting, that can be a very powerful tool for a coder. So we really tried to figure out how good is Gen AI at performing these different skills. And we went a step further and we just said, give me a rating here. Let's figure out, is Gen AI poor, fair, good, or excellent at performing a certain skill? And then that gave us understanding on the skill sides. But of course, we wanted to then see, okay, what does it actually mean for the labor market? And of course, the labor market is a collection of jobs. And jobs are a collection of skills, right? When someone writes a job description, they say, this person has to be good at this, 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 and this. And you write it all down, and we keep track of it. So in our database, we have a really good understanding of what skills are necessary to perform a certain job. So we took our understanding of how well Gen AI could perform certain skills and applied it to jobs. And our results were actually really interesting. First and foremost, the takeaway was that humans aren't going away anytime soon. You really still need humans to do a lot of work along the way. Even though Gen AI virtually touches every job out there, turns out, at least at this point, Gen AI is not good enough to perform a job single-handedly. We're all safe so far. Economist among them, even though apparently some of my skills will soon be replaced by Gen AI. We found that 20% of jobs that we looked at have a high exposure to Gen AI, meaning that among all the skills needed to perform these jobs, at least 80% or more of the skills needed were able to be performed at a well or excellent level by Gen AI. So 1 out of 5 jobs, Gen AI can really potentially impact. The rest, less so. But we wanted to dig in a little further and say, okay, what occupations are we actually talking about here? So then we went from jobs to different occupation sectors. And we found, there's a full list, by the way. I had to cut this thing down. Otherwise, you would have gotten your magnifying glasses out. So check the whole research brief to see the full list. But here, just a select few. Driving, we found, is least impacted. Now, let's put on the brakes for a second and think about how Gen AI is different from AI. We all have heard about self-driving cars. That's AI. And that's a whole different ballgame. Here we're talking Gen AI. And it turns out Gen AI is not so good at performing the skill of driving. Nursing is at the top, also not being highly exposed to these tools. Construction, therapy. However, on the other side of things, childcare would be among those as well, by the way. Software development is most impacted. You can kind of see that, mid-blue good right there. Turns out, for a lot of the skills needed for software development jobs, Gen AI could be helpful, and you have a potential exposure right there, or potential impact. Legal, HR, marketing, all these fields are potentially much more impacted by Gen AI than the other ones we just talked about. Now, this is quite different than what we've talked about in the past, right? When we talked about automation before, we talked about manual labor being replaced by automation, heavy work that needed to get done. So this, all of a sudden, we're talking knowledge workers being impacted. In fact, one of the relationships we looked at is, if you look at all the jobs that can be done remotely, we saw a really high correlation between remote work and the impact that Gen AI could have on these jobs. And you can see software development is all the way up there. Turns out it's really easy to be a software development engineer or something like that and work from home. Not so easy to do driving from home, obviously, or nursing. You kind of need to be there. And so if it takes a human and actual human interaction, Gen AI is proving not to be as helpful. However, and this is the cooking example I wanted to talk to you about, then this is how we get to the result that nearly all jobs are in some shape or form touched by Gen AI, that when looking at the skill of cooking, Gen AI actually has a bunch of contributions to make on that front as well. It's good at figuring out flavor combinations that might work, recipes that you might want to try out, directions on how to perform certain tasks in the kitchen. However, it's not going to chop the onion for you. So, again, you can think about these jobs and where Gen AI could come in helpful, or where it really just won't do so much for you. But it's really important to kind of dig in and get the details, because part of these skills can be done by Gen AI. Now, how does that make you feel? Is that going to give you the ickies? Are you saying, oh my God, this is terrible? Or are you optimistic? I tend to be optimistic. Turns out, in terms of who we surveyed for this, 72% of HR professionals were also optimistic about AI and thought that these tools will allow them to focus on more human aspects of the job, right? A lot of times what Gen AI could help you with is these repeatable tasks or summarizing something, but it's not going to take over your critical thinking, your empathy, your leadership, what you have to kind of show up with, particularly when you're interacting with other people. And so that is actually pretty good news. It could make us as people much more productive in our jobs, right? And free up our time to do the stuff we don't like to do, and actually do the stuff we perhaps like doing better. So hopefully we'll get better jobs coming out of this. Technology will actually improve the jobs we get to do. And listen, I definitely think there's going to be change here, and that change is going to be hard. We're going to lose some jobs. But if history has taught us anything, this advancement in technology will also give us a whole lot of new jobs along the way. Because as an economist, I like to think of it kind of like this, right? You have, as an employer, you're currently perhaps employing 10 people that code for you. Right now, with these tools, maybe you only need to employ 4 people because they've gotten so much more productive. So you no longer need to pay the other 6 people to do that job. So you've got some extra money in your pocket. It's a competitive market, so most likely you're going to invest that money in a new product and a new feature and hire some other people to help you do that, or tell the people to work on a new product. That's going to drive output for less money, and you'll be able to produce more and be just much more productive along the way. So there'll be some issues along the way, but at the end of the day, hopefully we'll be able to get to a better spot. With that, that's all I got. If this is interesting, make sure you check out hiringlab.org and check out the research from my team. And Ryan, I'm going to hand it back to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Svenja. Thank you so much. Thank you.